Our chalkware bunny decorations were pretty easy to make. We poured liquid plaster into candy molds, glued the pieces together, and used spackling to fill the gaps and to make a few accessories. Then we found a cool way to color these that's pretty easy too, and we'll show you how to do the whole thing with love for a country house. We used plastic candy molds, and you can probably use silicone too, but you may need to use a release agent before pouring. Then we used dab plaster of Paris, and the recipe on the box calls for 2 parts mixed to 1 part water, and we found that by mixing the dry into the wet and using room temperature water meant fewer air bubbles in our plaster. And because the candy molds are not flat, we made sure to level them on top of some children's blocks before pouring. We also figured out how much plaster we would need by pouring water into an empty mold, then pouring it out into a measuring cup to calculate the volume. And we always made extra, because then we were able to make some bases out of some recycled food containers. Now we let them dry. We let ours dry for a few days. The longer you leave them, the less chance of breaking. Plastic releases the plaster easily. This mold was overfilled, so we were able to scrape away some of the rough edges before unmolding. And the thing is, no matter how careful you might be, some of the plaster might break, but that's okay. We'll be gluing everything together next. So before gluing, we'll want to prime the fresh plaster with paint. You can use any kind of paint for this, but leave the outside of the figure unpainted if you want to use our coloring techniques. When the paint is dry, we can glue the pieces together. There'll be gaps, but we'll fill these later. So use a good strong glue like Tide Bond, assemble your pieces, and wipe away any excess glue. You can reconstruct as you go for any of those broken pieces and add your bases. Then let everything dry. To fill all the gaps and cracks and at the same time make your chalkware truly unique, we use DAP Drydex, which goes on pink and is white when it's dry. So we laid it on heavily where needed, and then we smoothed it into place with a wet paintbrush. And you can dab and feather and blend the spackling into the figure, and when it's dry, this spackling and plaster will match. You can also use spackling to make the look of clothing. So for this bunny, we sketched the jacket design in pencil onto the plaster, and you won't see this because we covered it later with the spackling, and then we applied the spackling with a knife. Then we smoothed the spackling with a wet brush, and since it will dry smoother than the rest of the bunny, it will look like a jacket. And you can scribe this, the spackling, while it's wet. So here we're using the edge of a plastic knife for the lapel line, and then we're going to build it up a little thicker on the cuffs and the coat tail and the lapels, and a few small bumps to make the buttons. So if your spackling shrinks in the gaps, just fill them in again and do the blending. And also you can use an emery board or sandpaper to smooth anything that's too bumpy. It's pretty easy to work with. So this little character is now ready to dry. And so now for some more details. Here's how a hat was made on another figure. We started with a cardboard ring. We covered it in spackling, which also glued and held the ring onto the figure, and then we also built it up on top of the hat for a hat band. The thing about sculpting like this, you don't have to be perfect, and some of this shaping is totally accidental, like this hat band. The trick is to know when something looks good and then just go with it. So this is us dabbing up and down to make the effect of grass. And here we are adding some larger details using air dry clay, like these Easter eggs, and clothing for another bunny, which was inspired by Benjamin, who is Peter Rabbit's friend in the Beatrix Potter stories. Later, we'll texture this kind of clay work with a little more spackling, but we're only going to do this a few times because don't be surprised if these kind of clay elements will pop off, because what you have to do is prime them and glue them, because plaster really needs to be primed before glue can work well on it. We're just going to do a little smoothing and we're going to put some plastic wrap on our spackling so it'll be fresh for another day. So here's a preview of how we tinted our plaster chalkware to look like the storybook characters. So we came up with this technique using powdered eyeshadow and soft pastels. And it's pretty easy to do. You just rub it on to the plaster and you blend it, and you can even remove some of it. Here we're doing it with an emery board for an antique effect. These are great for spring and garden room decor, or a child's room, or maybe to personalize for someone. We even got this to work on some thrift shop ceramics, and we cannot wait to show you the cool things we came up with. So don't miss the next video of Love for a Country House. Click on the sun logo to subscribe. We'll see you later.